Action. Hello, everyone. My name is Anthony Rowtie, and I'm doing a presentation on Guantanamo Bay, 20 years of counterterrorism controversy. Who was detained and why? For how long? What happened to those wrongly detained? What do these detentions have to do with justice? Who was detained and why? About 800 prisoners from 50 countries, most of which came from Afghanistan, Saudi Arabia, Yemen, and Pakistan, were brought to Guantanamo Bay as of 2002. These detainees were supposed members of Al-Qaeda and the Taliban. Why were they detained in Guantanamo Bay, and why was that location chosen? As to why they were detained there and why that location was chosen is because it offered a way to avoid legal limitations of handling prisoners. Let me explain. For one, relocating the prisoners will allow commanders in Afghanistan to focus on combat. But more importantly, the U.S. naval base in Cuba was largely secure. It was on foreign soil and thereby beyond the reach of the U.S. court. In fact, the U.S. exercised complete jurisdiction and control over that land in Cuba. It was also a short flight away from Washington, D.C. Over here, I have a picture of some of the detainees in the naval base. I would like to answer, who were they? These detainees were prisoners who were deemed the worst of the worst. They were said to be the most hardened terrorist enablers, yet this was untrue, as many of the prisoners were found to have little to no connection to Al-Qaeda or the Taliban. They were categorized as unlawful combatants, a term that the Geneva Conventions did not define, so they had no legal protections. Here is a map of Cuba. As you can see in the red box over here is where the Guantanamo naval base is, right off towards the edge of Cuba. For how long? Well, detainees still remain there to this day. Keep in mind that the first detainees arrived in Guantanamo Bay in early January of 2002. This was 2 weeks after December 27th, 2001, where the detention center went public. I should also note that in the detention center's peak of 2003, it held 660 men, with the last detainee arriving there in 2008. 9 have been reported to have died there. If you also look at my other bullet points, you notice that each administration from Bush to Trump handled releases and transfers differently. What of those wrongly detained? What happened? Those held there were placed in maximum security prison where their human rights were basically denied. Prisoners would be exposed to cruel and unusual torture where the Geneva Conventions did not apply to them. Let's speak about that torture by retracing the CIA's Enhanced Interrogation Techniques, or EITs for short. The CIA would conduct this interrogation of high-value detainees at black sites, secret jails where a prisoner had no bail or court order. Some were later transferred to Guantanamo Bay. EITs became in use after the capture of Abu Zubaydah in March 2003. EITs included physical slaps and grabs, sleep deprivation, stress positions, which meant awkward positions to hold for prolonged periods of time, with or without weights, and also waterboarding, which stimulated the feeling of drowning for the prisoner and caused brain damage. Also, by report of NBC, torture also included sexual humiliation. Oddly enough, female contractors or interrogators would wear tight-fitted shirts, miniskirts, and thong underwear to sexually embarrass male Muslim inmates. Sexual contact would be done via slap sitting, rubbing of hair and skin, and so on. They would also use red ink and pretend it was their menstrual blood, and then they would smear it on the prisoner's face. The prisoner could not then wash himself. He would feel sexually and religiously humiliated. Let's talk about the ethics debate and the results of the torture. As of 2006, the Pentagon directed its personnel to comply with the Geneva Conventions. The U.S. Supreme Court ruled that these conventions applied to the conflict with Al-Qaeda as well. In 2008, the Senate report went as so, quote, "The abuse of detainees damaged our ability to collect accurate intelligence that could save lives, strengthen the hand of our enemies, and compromise our moral authority," end quote. Of course, George W. Bush disagreed with this, and blamed several journalists, Congress members, and more for what he believed to be a misjudgment. Here we can speak about justice in a metaphorical sense. As we know, the 9/11 attacks sparked an anger in the American people. Islamophobia was definitely increased. Perhaps we could say that that's that some of the innocent Muslim civilians were used as scapegoats. So did we justify good through the cruel and unusual treatment of Muslim prisoners? Perhaps so. Before 9/11, the U.S. prosecuted terrorists in the federal court where there was constitutional safeguards, which is interesting, and it adds to how much effort was put in to avoid the power of the U.S. court to basically handle prisoners any way they wished. Luckily, this was changed in 2004 in the Russell v. Bush case, where now federal courts could review Guantanamo cases. 2 years later, in the Hamdan v. Rumsfeld case, Geneva Conventions applied to the prisoners. Overall, maintaining Guantanamo Bay is very expensive. NPR reported that the prison has cost over $6 billion to maintain for 18 years and still takes $380 million a year to maintain, despite the lower prisoner population being 39. Thank you for watching my presentation. Please comment, like, and subscribe.